tedesco parlare ho paura.
Don't give judgment until you hear the two sides of the story.
Yo creo que lo que le falta a Europa es el debate del compromiso político y social.
Buonasera.
Good evening, and thank you for being virtually with us at this event at the Goethe-Institut for a new roundtable discussion called Before Greta, Evolution of Feminism in Europe and the Role of Women in Sustainable, Environmental and Social Policies. Europe is more than a continent or a political union. It is, in first place, a multitude of stories, of lives, of experiences, which span many generations. And the project Tell Me About Europe invites people to listen and debate over interviews with European citizens. And these interviews together form the so-called European Archive of Voices. People born before 1945 talk about their lives and experiences in conversation with the younger generations. During these weeks, several events have taken or will take place within the project Tell Me About Europe in Prague, Moscow, Luxembourg, Sarajevo, Stockholm, Strasbourg, Tbilisi, Tirana, and London. Some of the events explored in depth the debate between East and West, others European citizenship, as well as to what extent we can call this our common home, and what Europe means for the younger generations. But what happened for Italy, Antonella? Well, in Italy, we interviewed Elisa Montessori and Bianca Maria Frabotta. And after reading or analyzing their interviews and comparing them to the younger generations, we decided to explore how creativity, arts, and feminism can be a key element to solve today's problems. Before I hand over the floor to Milvia Spadi, who is a journalist and host of tonight's talk, I'd like to thank all people who worked on this project and are now behind this virtual scenes. So first of all, Andrea Noce, who co-organized the project together with the Goethe-Institut and developed the videos. The team of the cultural programs here at the Goethe-Institut, namely Isabel Cento and Carmen Hof. The entire information and library team, Soledad Golinelli and Giuliana Clementi, our interpreters for tonight. And last but not least, thanks to our guests for the interesting conversations and to Milvia Spadi for the enthusiasm and commitment. Thank you very much, Antonella. Thank you very much to you and to the director of the Goethe-Institut, Joachim Bernauer. As you said, Europe is not only a continent, but thanks to the project of the Goethe-Institut, so Tell Me About Europe, we go back and try to retrace not only the history of Europe, but the history of feminism, a sort of intertwined history. They both work on sustainability and ecology. We will talk about it with all our female guests for tonight. We have Bianca Maria Frabotta. She's a female poet, writer, university professor, and she is also one of the female representatives who gave her contribution to feminism in Italy. And Angela Bubba, she's a researcher, a journalist, a writer who interviewed Bianca Maria Frabotta, who also was her teacher. Then we have another important personality, Elisa Montessori. She is a female painter who represents the female world through a series of works influenced by the Asian culture. And very interesting about her work is the fact that she recalls the illustrations of literary works. And we have interviewed Elisa Montessori a few days ago and talked about different topics with her. Together with us tonight is Marcella Corsi, Professor of Economics at the Department of Statistics at the University La Sapienza in Rome. And we will try to understand with her the complex European economy. She worked in England, was a researcher in Berlin, and is author of a series of books ranging from work economics to other economical issues from a gender perspective. And she is also the coordinator of a laboratory on gender diversity and inequality. Then we will also have experimentation and innovation and much more with Alice Boyd. She's a composer, sound designer, theater maker, and environmental campaigner. And Ilenia Caleo, she's also an activist. She is a part of the Tuba group and will tell us about her experiences. But first of all, let us begin from the project organized by the Goethe-Institut Tell Me About Europe. That's the German name of our group. Are very happy and delighted to take part in this project. We created a so-called archive of voices that was already introduced by the director Bernauer. We crossed the entire European continent. Behind me, you see the faces of the people that founded, together with me, the group. We had the idea for this project, then we came together 1 year ago in Hamburg, together with 50 more journalists, young journalists or activists, coming from 50 different nations. And as Mr. Bernauer already said, we wanted to go to each and every European country, meaning not the member states of the European Union, but taking a look at the entire European continent, because we're firmly convinced that the entire European continent is linked together. So we wanted to work also with Russia, with Georgia. We're 40 different countries now, 50 different young people, youngsters who work together and gave their contribution to recreate Europe after the Second World War. They want to witness and give their experience. As we will listen to Bianca Maria Frabotta afterwards, I think it is very important to take care of these witnesses, because they are somehow old-aged and won't be with us much longer. So it is really important to give people the opportunity to listen to their experiences, to listen to their voices, to see all the different cultural approaches, because they are the very center of our European identity. This is why I'm very proud that so many people have access to these voices through our website, European Archive of Voices.com. Here you will find a lot of interviews in the original language, so with the original audio, and then translated into English. The interview with Bianca Maria Frabotta is not online yet. We will mix it and translate it until the end of the year. But for example, we have the interview with another Italian man, Bartolomeo Zorg, and it's very interesting to listen to his opinion. So I give the floor back to Milvia Spadi. I think it is very important that Europe gives more voice and the possibility to talk to women. Thank you very much, Tom Müller, for this gathering of voices. It is very important, not only for our continent, because the history has been very complex, and so we start off with the first artist. But first of all, if there is anyone who is listening to us and has comments or questions for our guests, please reach us through the Facebook page of the Goethe-Institut Rome, or mail us at primadigreta@gmail.com. And at the end of each section, we will listen to the questions and try to answer them with our guests. So let's start off with Elisa Montessori, an interview. And I think that the first topic that inevitably is important to us is an opinion about the present times that we are living, because they prevent us from doing many things, especially those related to culture and arts. She survived World War II, so she can compare the conditions to the present days. History teaches us that all people who tried to unify Europe ended badly. The pandemic changed us deeply, very deeply, in a way that never happened to my generation, not even during the war. Because during the war there was an enemy, a physical one, a person that you had to fight to destroy. We, on the other hand, we have like an enemy within us. And the situation is the other way around. So if Europe isn't united today, without borders, it dies. We all die. I think that health laws and measures that are very justified, and if you ask me, I'm for the total lockdown. I'm sorry, because I would be the first one suffering from economical problems. And I have already lived my life, but I'm thinking about young people or workers, and I know very much what such a disgrace would mean. It's a true tragedy. But I keep on thinking that there should be one solid European position telling all the nations, all the member states, you can do this or you can't do this, in a very clear way. So this is a true necessity. If we talk about borders, sorry, it isn't possible to talk about borders nowadays as we did 2 or 3 months ago, because we have seen that this is a true global experience that we had never experienced before, and death, as we hear and feel it every day, is not comparable to the one experienced during the war. So there isn't a way we can survive if we don't stay together. So Elisa Montessori tells us that we are in a very important period in time, mainly because of the COVID-19 pandemics. But we would like to know what is important for an artist, for a female activist like she is, and what are her priorities, what comes first. I refused from the very beginning everything that makes a successful woman a personality. Life is more important. So passion for life. Life must always come first. And life includes sorrows, sufferings, pain, great joys. But the decision cannot be whether to make art and giving up many other things. This never convinced me, this argument. Why not? Well, because I think it's a form of self-harm to the human person. In this sense, I'm not on the side of women, not on the side of those women who believe either in one thing or the other. And for example, there are very few female artists in history who have a family. Now, do you realize what this means? Do you realize that if you want to become who you are, if you want to experience your talent, you have to give up relationships. Of course, you have to give up sufferings and pains, but it's not possible. Life must always come first. So life comes first. That's an important message. So what do you suggest to those who want to do art, the young generations, and how important is this way of finding your own way? The only thing I can tell young people is to study a lot without letting themselves being manipulated by computers. I belong to the first generation of women who actually had the right to vote. When I went to university, there were very few women who actually graduated. In my family, both the family on my mother's side and on my father's side, I have lots of cousins, of female cousins. We just had two women. One of my cousins older than me, who studied medicine, although she wasn't able to practice, and then me. I graduated in literature. It's very difficult to achieve culture.
Sì, allora siamo insomma, ormai oltre le ideologie del secolo scorso in Europa.
So we somehow have overcome ideologies, the ideologies of last century in Europe. And maybe today we don't have ideologies, but we still have radical positions, both right and left-minded. What should art do? I always thought that ideologies were something harmful in art. It's very difficult to bring an ideology, or let's say a political program, which is something not only a message to the others, but also an inner state of mind that must be lived in a subjective way. You cannot have like blinders, and you can't think that this is bad and this is good. We know exactly what the Nazis did with art, or even Russia, where ideology entered art. Art lost both quality and freedom, and you have to fight for freedom in an individual way. Of course, we need both an analytical and associative vision. Yes, both an analytical and an associative vision. And so we must think that certain things go in one direction, sorry, and others go in another direction that we have to question. I mean, I can vote for whom I want and still be a great artist, or the other way around. This is very interesting, of course. And Bianca Maria Frabotta and Elisa Montessori have met each other, and they also were awarded different prizes for their engagement and commitment in feminism. So let's hear what she said. Bianca Maria Frabotta, I remember her as a young girl. We met once and we were talking about different topics. Some were talking, others were listening. I mean, it was a very simple dialogue. We didn't go in depth into the topics, but we're talking about matters of our everyday life. Elementary things. For example, let's meet here and there because we have to talk about this topic or another one. We understood that there was a revolution going on and we had to defend our point of view. She was a very sweet woman, but with her own authority. And when I introduced her, and I had great esteem for her, so we introduced Bianca Maria Frabotta.
And we are going to talk about Angela Bubba, who also had an interview with Bianca Maria Frabotta. But first of all, a comment to this memory of Elisa Montessori. What I remember this meeting. And for many years, I have had in front of me a sort of scroll, paperwork by Elisa. And it is still there. I hanged it with 3 pins. This was her idea when we talked about creativity. I really do not feel up to the standard of what she actually said. There is something which I remember and I know perfectly well, and i.e. feminism at the time was not an intellectual experience. To me, it is not an ideological experience, a study experience. It was rather a matter of personal suffering, of personal life, of discomfort. For instance, my mates at university, they were very much interested in my body, and my body was quite nice, I must say. But it seemed that it was not intended for housing a mind. And in my experience, this was really a source of unease. And then I discovered the neo-feminism, that is a small group of people who were self-aware. And there was a sort of buzzword, a password, was we talked about self-awareness. And it was a very new method, an extraordinary method. We were all different in that context, but we were all united by a special thing. Our personal life, as a matter of fact, had a political value. I would like to leave the floor now for the next questions to Angela Bubba, in order to go into detail as to the work of Bianca Maria Frabotta. Angela Bubba, good evening. Good evening. I'm sorry because I think that you will not be able to see me. We have some technology problems, but I remember you quite well. I remember Bianca Maria quite well. I would like to talk about the interview. Yes, of course. I would like to talk about freedom, for instance. I chose Bianca Maria. To me, she has always been a great poetess and professor, Bianca Maria Frabotta. She was my professor at the time. And I can tell you that her courses were among the most interesting, the most beautiful courses, and they really are still in my heart. So her interview was especially touching, and it actually went through her life. So there was this intimate landscape we heard about, but also professional and public aspects that everybody knew. I was very much impressed by her thought, her reflection about when I asked her what was the value that she tried to convey to her students, including me. And she replied, freedom. It's a dramatic word, we can say, in these times, but it has never been more important. And in the interview, this word, freedom, is always associated with the word borders. At this point in time, at this stage, I mean, we can say that Europe is really closing its borders again. So we should really go through this theme. I can say that the interview was really touching, beautiful, and this is the point I really wanted to refer to. And I asked this question out of curiosity because I had been a student of hers, and so I wanted to know what was the message behind her words, the message she sought to convey to her pupils. It is not always something that we should take for granted, that a professor is able to convey a message, to channel a message beyond the notions or the subjects that are studied. So being a student of hers, I really wanted to know whether there was something behind the material that we studied, something sort of a message that she actually sought to convey. And I think that she did this in an amazing way. Should I say something? What do you think about it, Bianca Maria? There's one thing I'd like to say. When I hear people say I'm a great poetess, I can tell you that it's not just a false modesty, but I taught at university, and to me, work on literature was actually a job, because I actually lectured, and I taught about authors was so great that my tendency is to compare to these authors. I actually taught them to love these authors. I never talked about my poetry. I didn't think about it. When you teach at university, colleagues are not so much in favor of talking about our personal work. I loved my students and they loved me in turn. This is true. And I thought that what is really important is that we need to respect the freedom that we feel inside. So being faithful to this passion, this is the road which leads us to poetry, creativity. And actually, I was rewarded by this approach. I don't know whether you can remember this experience. Maybe not. You are too young to remember this. But when I retired, Some of my students gave me an extraordinary book as a present, the book of pupils. Yes, I saw that book. I read it. In my opinion, it is an amazing book. It's a beautiful book because it bears witness to a sort of university that vanished, that disappeared. It's no longer there. They talked about their way of seeing and feeling what I actually conveyed to them. And they also judged me. I'd like to quote that, I'd like to mention that many students have become much more famous than I am. I will never forget the testimony of Melania Mazzucco. She has become much more famous. She's much better known than I am. In a testimony, she wrote something that still today makes me blush. She wrote, Bianca Maria didn't teach poetry, she was poetry. What else could I want? Certainly, professors are the ones who have merit if students behave like that. Any more questions? Or I have a question to Professor Frabotta, or Poetess Frabotta, rather. Angela, can you hear me? Yes. There is an important episode I'd like to mention. We were talking about borders, division, and we move on to talk about language as a homeland. It's the first land or the first home of a man. So if we think about the landscape that we are experiencing that is quite gloomy, this is a sentence I keep going back to with my mind. I don't know whether in the light of this new closure of physical homelands, not certainly of spiritual or moral homelands, how can we reconcile these two aspects, in your opinion? Or whether our language homeland in such a dramatic situation is somehow enhanced. Actually, I crossed the borders the first time because I was awarded with a trip to Strasbourg. It was Minister Colombo at the time who came to deliver this prize to me during the ceremony, and I was extremely excited. And I was extremely excited in in visiting Germany and a visit to Dachau. And I discovered the lights and shadows of our Europe, the Europe of the 19th century. In terms of the language, I can read just a few languages: French, Italian, not certainly German, but speaking German, really I can't speak German. There's nothing worse than muttering in a language that is not yours. But I was often invited as an Italian expert. They wanted to hear my beautiful language. And I felt honored by this recognition. We can say that through translations, starting from translation from Latin and Greek, was not so good. This is what I wrote. I was not good at all at translating from other languages. And Europe is like the rest of the world. We felt a great euphoria in the transition to the year 2000, the postmodern world. But today, what we are experiencing is that we are sort of a giant with the clay feet because of the pandemic. Angela, any more questions on your part? I'd like to hear the opinion of Bianca Maria Frabotta, because this year the Literature Award went to a poetess for a specific reason that is quite interesting, for her unmistakable poetic voice and the austere beauty that makes the individual existence universal. So sharing individual existence through the austerity of such existence through beauty. I mean, it's an amazing passage. An American friend of mine who translated almost all my works, my difficult poems, she was really excited about this recognition. But I want to say that there are many women who are important, and La Sapienza University is going to have a woman rector, Antonella Polimeni. And a colleague of mine defined her young, beautiful, she's a doctor, and she comes from Calabria. So she has so many nice features. And I'd like to end on this note. How can we forget the light radiating from the face of Kamala Harris? She's amazing, an amazing woman. The first woman who is colored, for sure. She holds the position of vice president. Maybe she will become the first president of the United States. I really hope this will happen. And I'm writing a poem dedicated to her, because she really emits light, and so she sheds light on all of us. One point: having a rector who is a woman, and the media can write about this. Shouldn't this be the time when a female rector is okay? But we should not make comments about the fact that she is a woman. So that is the issue of equal opportunities. We should start from that type of reasoning, that is equal opportunities. We should say that. We should not stress the point. We should be recognized because we have a mind. We should be acknowledged for this, not for other aspects. But, Milva, allow me to say, I do not trust this. I do not trust this. So this is not something to be taken for granted. And I will stop speaking because I tend to speak too long. But sometimes the body betrays us. In terms of what our painter was saying, she said that for an artist, it was not possible to have children. I suffered a lot because I wanted to have a child, but I couldn't have one. So my body suffered a lot because I wanted a child. And what my body did is that it started producing a hormone, prolactin, that is a sort of anti-conceptional drug, natural substance that prevents the body from conceiving a child. So we should think that there is a nature in our body. We have weaknesses. We should be less proud. I really believe in the important function of women. It's something that I firmly believe in. Thank you so much, Bianca Maria Frabotta. I'd like to ask a question to Angela Bubba, who is a young writer.
So you're now writing your thesis, your PhD thesis on Anna Maria Ortese. You're both women from the South. Anna Maria Ortese is a writer as yourself. What do you say? Now, Anna Maria Ortese, as a Southern writer, now she lived part of her life in Libya, then in Naples, then came to live and work in Rome. So I wouldn't go as far as defining her Southern writer. Well, I was referring to the topics she writes about. Yes, I'm finishing my PhD thesis on her, and I tried to talk about the post-colonial influence Native Americans had on her writing, starting from the earliest works, very visionary books, as well as in her last books. Now, it's very puzzling the way she talks about nature, about the relationship between man and nature, which is very linked to the thoughts of Giacomo Leopardi. And what she says is very contemporary. I remember when I was writing the introduction to my PhD thesis last February, the COVID-19 pandemic had just broken out. So when I saw dolphins in the Gulf of Naples and squirrels that in a very surreal way were walking through the streets of Milan, of course, without cars, without traffic jams, without common means of transport, I thought about what Anna Maria Ortese was trying to shout out to the world, to give nature her position back. So we somehow limited ourselves, and when we regained our freedom, we went back to our former habits, and which is, of course, a bad thing. Now, I think that she certainly would have criticized what we have been doing in newspapers and magazines, with books. She was a true activist during the last period of her activity. So it was this paradigm. She had chosen Native Americans as a sort of referrer because she felt as a stranger and both a foreigner within one person. And she was always talking about the Native Americans because of this. And on the other hand, we have the animals that have been conquered, offended by human beings. Of course, she was talking all the time about the weak elements in our societies, not only animals that are somehow oppressed by human beings, but also about the marginalized in our society. So for a moment or for a few months during the general lockdown here in Italy, I had the feeling that everything that Anna Maria Ortese wrote was in a way implemented into our lives, as if I was actually living literature, not only in my little room, as Petrarca said, but on a worldwide basis, on an international level, everywhere in the world. Well, it was certainly a very strong experience for each and every one of us, as Elisa Montessori said at the very beginning in her interview. It was an unprecedented experience. So thank you very much to Angela Bubba. And before we go on, if you have any comments or questions, there are two ways to reach us. It's either through the Facebook page of the Goethe-Institut home, or you can send us an email at primadigreta@gmail.com. Now let's talk about economics combined with environmental sustainability. We need to preserve in one way or the other. And the first question to Marcella Corsi is the following.
So what is the link between feminism and sustainability? Over the last few years, many women have become protagonists in the protection of the environment. Greta Thunberg is the latest example, but we can remember Klein, many representatives within the European Parliament in the Green Party. Can you talk about that? First of all, hello to everybody. Please allow me to say something which is not polemic, even though it can appear to be so. You mentioned the great event held which happened at La Sapienza University. The transition from the previous rector and the current rector, woman rector. And she really wanted to stress this point, that she's a female rector. And for the record, I would like to remind you that there are 7 women rectors in 84 universities in Italy. So I fully agree with Mrs. Frabotta in not trusting too much that things will happen as they should. If we think that a lot of progress was made in terms of equal opportunities. Data shows, also in the European context, I'm talking about data of the European Institute of Equal Opportunities in Vilnius that has just published the latest report a few weeks ago, showing these composite indicators, the Gender Equality Index. And it is the second time that they publish this indicator, and the 2 reports have emphasized the same bad news, unfortunately. They stressed that equal opportunities in Europe go ahead very slowly. It's a snail pace in the progress of such equal opportunities. So in an indicator that is up to 100, after 60 euros of history of Europe, we are still at 60, and that is quite critical in terms of power. In the world of power, the good news of my university is that this is an important data item that we should discuss also here all together. And I apologize, but I could not refrain from raising this point. That is my university, so I had to say this. Let's move on to the Feminist Economist. I was invited especially and specifically for this very reason. In the introduction, you mentioned the laboratory Minerva that I have the honor and the burden to coordinate. It's a multidisciplinary lab on university and gender inequalities. At La Sapienza University, carrying out research from the economy to sociology, political sciences, up to humanities and history. Can I ask a question? First of all, I apologize for using the word rector. I agree with you that we have also feminine words in Italian. We have the word rettrice, that is a female rector. But to go back to the subject, I know that you are in favor of gender quotas. At this point in time, the government proposed for the pandemic contribution benefits 100% for people who hire women. Is this something meaningful? You said that I agree with the quotas, and it is true, but in the context of feminism and feminist economy, I can tell you that it's a very divisive issue. Maybe I'm sounding quite argumentative, but that is not my nature. I'm not in favor of this proposal, not so much because it's not a measure that can achieve a useful result, but it cannot be a measure to be put in place in isolation. This contribution can be placed in a package of measures concerning women's labor, because this would result into fewer taxes and fewer revenues for the state. I think that the state should receive all the necessary resources to favor the inclusion of women in the labor market and the strengthening of the situation of women within society. If the state receives fewer resources, the state will spend fewer resources. So the crisis that we are going through, and this is the first question you asked, shows that we need a new economic paradigm. At the heart of this, there should be a different role of the state. This is something which has been discussed among economics scholars for a long time. So how much market, how much state, more market. But in the crisis of the 2019. And in Italy, in Lombardy, there was a very critical situation in this privatized health system. The example of the region of Lombardy, which has become one of the main areas of contagion in our country, should lead us to think through the guarantees to be provided to citizens in terms of provision of services. Provision of services is not for free. It has to be funded, even though the budget law was stopped at the European Parliament because of the opposition of Poland and Hungary, rather at the European Council. And the speaker apologizes. But even though the money can come from outside, a state should fund itself through taxes. So all the cuts of taxes can be harmful because something is given on one hand and something else is taken away on the other hand. And this is dangerous for women. Women actually need a strong state that can finance the health system, schools, all the measures to support families, concerning also the care work for the elderly, which is an important topic in the current health crisis, and more in general, care as a public good. And this also concerns the environment. The question you asked before, I didn't want to miss this question. When I talk about care as a public good, this is a concept which concerns a new economic paradigm, what we call the economy of care. That is not just care for people, but it's first of all care for the planet. Unless we protect ourselves vis-à-vis the climate crisis and the changes that are caused by the environmental pollution, this will have an impact on the care for people and on the future of our children, and also the relations between generations. A topic that we are discussing from different perspectives. First of all, I would like to thank you for your answer that was not argumentative but critical. The pandemic affects women very heavily. What do you expect will happen after this period that we wish will not be too long? The request for having people still work remotely from home for a long time. Is this a disadvantage for women? In an interview some time ago, I launched this term coming from the Anglo-Saxon world, the so-called she-cession. This crisis that we are experiencing is quite different from the crisis that we have just experienced, the crisis of 2008. At the time, the crisis had affected from the employment standpoint sectors where there were mainly men, the manufacturing sector, the energy sector, also the more the sector where financial resources are higher. It was a financial crisis, first of all. The current crisis affects occupational sectors where there are mainly women. This has an impact on families or households' income that is quite different from the previous crisis. So we are dealing with families that were recovering after the previous crisis, also thanks to the involvement of women in the labor market, because husbands lost their jobs. So women had to start working, also in those families that were directly influenced by cultural stereotypes. So women should stay at home and be a housewife. Also in those households, women had to work. But that is, we're talking about women who are now losing jobs. So we have a number of negative factors impacting family income. And the Oxfam report said that the face of poverty in Italy is single women with children. It's nothing new. In the European framework, this data already emerged in previous reports also published by the European Commission. But as for Italy, there is new evidence showing more than before how important a gender analysis of economic phenomena is quite important, how urgent a radical approach in the shift of economic paradigm that should also inspire our policies. I hope I was able to answer your question. You actually did. Last question. I'd like to delve into this point. The economy and finance, these are themes that are still in the hands of men. Is there a philosophy of female economics that is also linked to sustainability? So can you elaborate on this? There is the so-called feminist economy. There is an international association, this International Association of Feminist Economics, that was established 25 years ago. There is a magazine that is well known, the Feminist Economics, that has celebrated its 25th anniversary. We are quite proud of this because we have also an online magazine. And I'm quite pleased because I was one of the founders of this magazine. This year, they celebrated 11 years from their inception. So we are young, but not so young, we can say, in the history of journalism on one hand and economics on the other. Feminist economics has a stronghold. We should give up the assumption of homogeneous economic agent in the context of the stereotype of homo economicus. It is something that is often debated. In reality, it is quite clear that we are not all homini economici, because the beauty of life is that we are all different and we are men and women. So structuring or shaping recipes of economic policies based on a paradigm where economic agents are homini economici and they are white and rich, because unless you're rich, you cannot make the optimal choices prescribed by theories. So being outside the world around us. So the feminist economy for 25 years has criticized this dominant paradigm and is building an alternate paradigm. We're not building a paradigm based on economic females, but diversity should become a resource, something that can be leveraged in order to build policies that can benefit all, men, women, children, the elderly, migrants, natives, and so on and so forth. It's a very long list. Gender, that is the word that we use to represent our approach, is a multidimensional concept. It's not just a matter of being men or women, but rather how men and women can actually show themselves in reality in the different contexts where they operate and interact, because economics is based on relations. Thank you so much, Marcella Corsi.
Thank you very much for everything you told us. We would have listened to you for hours and hours. Yes, let's talk more about Europe. That's my wish.
Bene, e adesso andiamo alle realtà giovanili locali.
Okay, now let's talk about young spirits, the avant-garde with Ilenia Caleo. Hello, hi. Are you there, Ilenia? Ilenia Caleo? Are you there? Yes, yes, I'm there. I'm here. I'm connected. Wonderful. She grew up in the underground movement. Could you talk briefly about your work, your experience? What is underground today?
Well, in fact, the way we produce culture has changed a lot. I work in brackets, and perhaps this is also a merit of feminism, of feminist movements, both on stage as a performer, as an artist, but I also carry out more theoretical research. And this is one of the debts we owe to feminism, I think. They have broken the boundaries between genders, even disciplinary ones. The system of cultural production has changed a lot. And compared to the genealogy of feminism, looking at the generations represented in this debate, I belong biographically, anagraphically, to the feminism of the 1990s, to queer transfeminism. The 90s until the early 2000s were a time in which there was a very strong relationship between mainstream cultures, hegemonic ones, and countercultures or marginal cultures. Yes, right. Now, the system has changed a lot. You are right. Today, it is very difficult to identify an independent culture or counterculture. The most interesting practices among the performing arts, the most experimental ones, are those that manage to move in between different spaces and gaps, and there is no longer an identitarian connotation with respect to the origin of an independent culture as we knew it from the 1970s to the 1990s and 2000s. What is the Ecopole Atelier where you are displaying your work? Tell us something about it. Well, we talked about it with Andrea and Antonella while preparing this meeting recently, especially in my work as a researcher. I have been investigating the theories of the body, of feminism, of matter, and in the last few years, there has been a great production of theory, research, also experimentation, political imagination on matter, on an ancient materiality, an active matter. And this goes back, or, well, you talked about it before, and Bianca Maria recalled it. Feminism is a space of thought, often with tensions that can be reduced to the academic space. Now, the Ecopole Atelier is an excellent connection with what Marcella Corsi was saying earlier. It is a research group located inside the IAF Italia, and here you can also find the results of our work. We have worked for several years as an external research group, and we were 5 or 6 researchers with different positions, biographies, ages. Federica Giardini, Isabella Pinto, Maria Enrica Giannuzzi, Gaia Picardi, Alessia Dro, and myself. So a group that studied on these matters, and we exchanged our studies, we co-researched and shared thoughts around the ecologies / feminist or transfeminist economies, so new paradigms. And what we have outlined and investigated is reported in 3 journals called Body Metrics, available on the IAF Italia website. It's a path of studies that I have developed and that also finds great feedback on some of the practices, some aesthetics that artists are experimenting on stage.
È un percorso di studi che poi ho sviluppato e che trova moltissime eco anche su alcune pratiche, alcune estetiche che le artiste e gli artisti stanno sperimentando oggi sulla scena. Innanzitutto ecco questa idea.
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to ask you if you share this work with your male colleagues. I imagine. Yes, as far as I'm concerned, the question is obviously not about the biology of bodies, but feminism is a project of radical transformation that concerns both male and female. And I also take part within this project as a person belonging to the queer community, which is not linked to a biology of bodies, to a naturalization of bodies, to the idea of a homogeneous female subject, but rather a composition of possible multi-dimensional subjects. So Marcella has already mentioned this before. My focus, horizon of research and also of political activism is more in this perspective. On the contrary, there is still a lot to do on concepts and paradigms. We need to break patriarchal or colonial paradigms which often go together. And this perspective, today we're trying to map the so-called new ecologies, and I think this is a bit the central point. How should we rethink the matter? There are many inputs about this, even from the latest feminist, trans-feminist generations, what we call a feminist neo-materialism, just to use a label and destroy it right away. So something that is recomposed, reassembled with new words, the idea of an agent, an active matter. Jane Bennett, a philosopher, speaks of vibrant matter, so of a vitality, a very strong, which is at the same time a very strong political indication. It is also a work of imagination, and here I found the link with the most artistic work that concerns me directly. A first, more political, immediate reason is that the idea of a dead matter, a motionless nature, reinforces fantasies of conquest. So a paradigm of domination and also of consumption that is a paradigm of exploitation, something patriarchal and colonial at the same time. So historically, the feminist movements have shown us, like the work of Silvia Federici and many others, the very strong link between, on the one hand, the devaluation of the work of care, of reproduction, so a work that is described and told as naturalized, always available, and the devaluation of the matter, of the resources. These ideas go hand in hand, as if the resources were available for free. We find ourselves inside an extractive model that is also a sexual and a colonial one. To be able to break this paradigm with a new form of political imagination is, for me, the real issue at the moment. And on this, I very much agree with the words of Marcella Corsi. We must move to an expanded concept of the idea of care. So, taking also as a paradigm the analysis of domestic but also emotional, sexual, gender-referred generational work, as feminism has always done historically.
Very keen on seeing the results of your work. You work together with the library, the bookshop Tuba, and we will now see a brief video where Ilenia Caleo has worked and participated, because now the Libreria Tuba is located in a particular area of Rome called the Pigneto, a popular spot for young people where you can find the so-called movida, but also a meeting point for Roman culture. And here we have a female bookshop. Yes, Tuba is a women's bookshop, a bar, an erotic bazaar, a place of sociality that was designed by women for women, a place that thinks about all pleasures, which are both intellectual and physical. So we have the idea to create a place open to creativity and especially open to women's creativity. This means that we give room to writers, but also to artists. And we organize projects. We have many book presentations and even 2 festivals, one for female writers and another one for female illustrators and cartoonists, Bande des Femmes. The common feature of what we do here is to give a space to bodies to create a place where the word around these themes and the reflection on these themes is alive, a place where all forms of feminism feel like at home. This was an interview with Sara Di Nella, who is one of the organizers of this Tuba workshop. Now we go to the UK, to Alice Boyd. She has a very recent, a very young experience. She's a composer, a sound designer, a theater maker, an environmental campaigner. She has already worked for the project Tell Me About Europe and conducted a very interesting interview with Baroness Mary Goody, an influential personality in the UK, both with regard to inclusion and gender equality policies, but also a very particular personality. She's a member of the House of Lords, and unlike Brexit, she has a very optimistic view on the inclusive policies of the European Union. Hello, Alice Boyd. Could you tell us something about the interview, first of all?
Hello, yes. So it was an amazing interview. Baroness Mary Gowdy is one of the Labour members of the House of Lords, and there are some things that I took away from it. The first thing that I was really, I guess, encouraged by is hearing about Baroness Mary Gowdy's care for other people. So hearing about her experience growing up in London after World War II and working on various councils, local councils, helping people helping people with housing, helping people with gardens, and basically just after World War II, the number of different people who were coming to London from, different refugees, and also her experience as the child of 2 Irish parents at a time when Irish people were not, were discriminated against in England. It was a really interesting interview. And then hearing about how important the EU and Europe is to her, and especially kind of the peace building experience after World War II. I think, it was amazing to hear about her involvement on the international stage, and also on the stage of getting involved in Europe and pushing for peace building for women and for children's rights. And one thing that really stood out for me was she explained the importance of moving forwards from coronavirus, and this has hit the whole world so incredibly hard, but the most important thing is to try as hard as we can not to let it affect the progress that we've made in terms of climate change, in terms of feminism and equality. Those things are definitely all at risk because of the pandemic, and also because of Brexit as well. So in the UK, a lot of funding has gone into Brexit, and it's this thing that's kept going on forever and ever, and it has, as a result, sort of made it more. It has diverted a lot of attention onto Brexit, away from things like climate change, away from equality. And yeah, she basically was saying it's so important that moving on from this, that we continue to work on these things and look forward rather than looking backwards.
Ci vuole parlare un po', ci parli un po' del suo lavoro.
Could you tell us a little bit about your work? What is this Staging Change, this artist-led organization which aims to improve the environmental sustainability in theatre?
Yes, so I am primarily an artist myself. So I work as a composer and sound designer for theatre shows. And basically, when I was working in the theatre industry and going to different festivals, so I went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is the biggest arts festival in the world. I was going there every summer and I was seeing that there was definitely an opportunity within the arts to address sustainability and to address climate change, both in the work that we create, but also in the way that we produce work. So thinking about how we can make work, theatre work, more environmentally sustainable. So I started a network with fellow theatre makers, different venues, to talk about sustainability and try to improve our practice. What we found is that venues, often for artists, it can be quite intimidating going up to a venue and saying, have you considered moving to renewable energy? Have you considered programming work about climate change? So we were able to act as a voice as artists ourselves, going to these venues with a whole network of artists behind us. So we have over 300 theatre makers, theatre companies, different venues across the UK and beyond in our network called Staging Change. And we are basically sharing advice about how to make work more environmentally sustainable and also to produce work about climate change.
È molto interessante. E su questo abbiamo anche
This is very interesting. I think we have a video contribution that we could see now about your work.
Molto particolare, vuoi dirci qualcosa su questo lavoro?
Could you tell us something about this work?
Yes, so that's a short section of a longer audiovisual piece that I made with someone called James Frederick Barrett. So he made the visuals, and it was actually from a trip that he took to Antarctica to see the melting going on. And I made the sound. I think it was a bit quiet there, but it's basically a piece about eco-anxiety and the feeling of when you learn about climate change and the impact it might have, particularly as a younger person with hopefully quite a lot of my life left to live, thinking about how the world might look in 2050 in, you know, however many years. And this is coming from a place of privilege where I'm, you know, a white person in the UK, but thinking about the people around the world who are more vulnerable than I am and who might be affected, and thinking about climate refugees and the way that climate change might affect food stability and anything like that in different places. And it's basically a piece about the feeling of becoming aware of this and how overwhelming it can be. But yeah, I more recently I've been trying to make pieces that are more positive and about more positive action that we can take to, I guess, to tackle climate change. And yeah, for example, I started making a show with my friend Rosa, which was it was a drag comedy climate show about these two men called Alan and Ron, and about them coming to terms with the climate crisis. And we were particularly interested in doing a play from the perspective of two middle-aged white men in the UK, because as the people who might be least affected by climate change, but perhaps are among the biggest contributors to climate change, and how they in turn can become aware of that and I guess deal with it on a personal level, because of course as individuals it's difficult to understand our impact on climate change because it's these huge systemic structures that contribute to climate change, and it's government and business. Yet I think particularly in the West we have a responsibility to realize our part to play in climate change and the way that we sort of contribute to the system.
Beh, è un lavoro molto importante, soprattutto
great work, also because you try to lift the consciousness of the people. Thank you very much to you. And now we go back, and I'm talking now to those watching. If you have any comments or questions for our guests, you can reach us out on Facebook or via mail. We saw, of course, so many different realities that are all part of a truly vast topic. In conclusion, we would like to focus on one of the most important feminist movements in Italy, a place that itself contains the history of women and is still a fundamental point of reference in Rome. It's called the International House of Women, within a complex that is called Buon Pastore, the Good Shepherd, that was used in former days as a female prison. So it was now somehow freed by modern women.
And we hear now a video with Cossuta. The International House of Women was founded by the Roman feminist movement following the struggles of those years after the occupation of Via del Governo Vecchio. It is above all a historical and a symbolic place for feminism. In the house there is an archive of documentation, the most important one in Europe, but also 30 associations that carry out important services. First of all, services against violence against women. These services are not neutral, and the approach to gender diversity is fundamental. There are also services for women's health, training and work orientation. We have also opened a social desk, a social office for all needs of all Italian and foreign women. And these services do not only have a social value, they also have an economic value that have been estimated around 700,000 euros. So what do we tell to Mayor Virginia Raggi, who considers us to be morose tenants? Well, women are not indebted. In the house, there are also associations that work in the field of culture, organizing events, conferences, research studies, but also artistic events. But the house, like all feminist places, is also a place of political action. And I think that feminist political action is increasingly necessary. And unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has proven us to be right. We called it a political paradigm of care, which means that women do not have to save humanity, but we have to concentrate on social reproduction. These kind of thoughts are increasingly important. So it is very important for us that the House of Women, like all women's places, needs to be defended because we are all the House of Women. We belong to it. That's the way it is. Yes, and of course, we all hope that the International House of Women will still be alive for the years to come, because they do a lot of cultural work. They organize cultural events and do many
positive services for women. Now, I hand back the microphone virtually to Antonella Perin because I think she has gathered the questions. She is a director of the culture program section. So first of all, a comment that was written on Facebook. I really hope that this female rector will set the stage, and let's hope that this shift towards a female direction will be very important. And this was referring to the fact that the university in Rome, La Sapienza, will soon have a female rector. A question for Alice Boyd. Now, you followed this debate, which was a classical Italian debate. Did you find any differences between Italy and the UK?
In what particular area, just in general?
I think in general.
I found some parts a bit difficult to follow just because of the sound. But I found it was very interesting to hear. I think just because the UK is in this particular position right now where, you know, we've got 6 weeks until we're meant to completely leave Europe, and I think that it's really, I've sort of grown up with Brexit in the air. So the Brexit vote happened when I was 20 years old, and it's been in the news so much since then, ever since then. So I was really sort of looking forward to the possibility of, you know, working in Europe one day, and I hope that still happens, of course, but it only becomes more difficult when, you know, if there are visas, you need to get visas to go to these different places. So I think there is definitely some, I know for people, the friends for my friends and for my kind of bubble of people, there is this sort of sadness around leaving Europe and this, I guess, a different sense of hope. It sounds, hearing from the Italian speakers tonight, there's a lot more hope for being part of Europe and the prospects that come with that. Whereas I think for me and for my generation and for my friends in the UK, there's a lot more kind of sadness and uncertainty, and we don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know whether our industry will be really negatively affected by Brexit. So I think with coronavirus happening, and particularly in the arts and theatre industry, that's already such a blow. And then we just have no guidance about what will happen with Brexit. You know, there's 6 weeks left and we still don't have a deal. There's just a lot of uncertainty. So it's amazing to hear how important Europe is for the speakers tonight. And that's just a huge difference, the level of hope, I think. That was a bit of a pessimistic note to end on, but yeah, I think that's just what it is.
Interessante.
Very interesting what you just said. Any other comments or questions?
Marcella Corsi che aveva...
I think that Marcella Corsi wanted to say something.
Mi sono prenotata per rispondere ad Alice.
Yes, I raised my hand to say something to Alice, and I hope she's still with us. I was very impressed that a young girl like her had such a great perception of Brexit. And I want to make sure that as long as a feminist economy is concerned, and please follow what Great Britain is doing and the UK is doing, within this area, because it's one of the nations where feminist economy mostly developed. It was founded as a discipline in the UK, and there is a movement made of researchers, both male and female, because feminist economy, it's not just a topic for women, but also for men. And there is this group called Women's Budget Group,
che è un grande interlocutore del vostro governo, indipendentemente dal
talks a lot with your government, no matter which political party is at the government. So even with Boris Johnson, they keep on talking about economics with him. And the Women's Budget Group carries on some proposals of caring economy. And in recent days, during the COVID-19 pandemic, they wrote down some rules on how we can survive somehow despite the pandemic within the feminist economy. So it's a sign of hope, I think, for us as well, not only for the UK. Yes, certainly. So, Antonella, are there any other questions?
No, qua va bene, se volevi...
Allora, ci abbiamo alle conclusioni, anche se è difficile tirare delle conclusioni.
So, the conclusions. I think we talked about a very vast topic, like the topic about feminism that goes back to the 19th century. So topics that have been very important and are parallel to the objectives of the European Union. The European Union was awarded with a Nobel Prize for Peace 2012. And for example, peace is a very important topic for women, as well the caring of the cultures. And I think these are all topics that go hand in hand with the evolution of the feminist movements. So I think that we have to hope that these intents, that these values will be still alive in the years to come for the sake of women, of the environment, and of every one of us. This said, I would give the microphone to the director Joachim Bernauer for his conclusions. Thank you very much to all our female guests, and thank you very much to those who worked at this project. And have a nice evening.
Grazie,
Thank you very much to everyone who took part: Bianca Maria Frabotta, Elisa Montessori, Angela Bubba, Marcella Corsi, Ilenia Caleo, Sara Dinella, Alice Boyd, Maura Casuto, and of course Milvia Spadi. And thank you very much to all the women and some men who made this project come true. Thank you very much to all of those who followed this event on YouTube or Facebook. I think this was the most complicated debate ever for the Goethe-Institut, so thank you very much for your patience and interest. Personally, I was really impressed about this dialogue crossing borders and generations, and I am convinced that the female feminist contributions tonight have all the hope in a better future. I think we need to be optimistic with our poetry, our art, our visions, our music. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much, and long live Europe. Thank you very much to everyone.